30 years ago, destiny brought together a small group of folks with a common seeking. They had been dismayed and disillusioned by the consumptive and wasteful modern lifestyles and the alienation from nature, and were seeking an alternative life. To explore the possibilities, about 100 acres of completely barren and degraded land was acquired. The land was then allowed to heal. It was fenced off with a few small earthworks, and then it was allowed to rest and revive. What happened, however, was beyond anyone's expectation or imagination. Slowly a forest planted itself back, a scrub jungle emerged in 10 years, and over the next couple of decades a vibrant forest established itself with the seeds brought in by the birds and the animals and perhaps the wind. Today it is home to over 200 species of birds, a host of wild animals, including the deer, wild boar, and then wandering elephants and bison. With the miraculous transformation of the land as an inspiration, an overarching vision statement was formulated. This was going to be the place to explore how to live in ecological balance and spiritual harmony, a place where we tread more gently on the planet while yet leading fulfilling lives. The foundation was to be what we call inner work, a set of practices that would give us a sense of centeredness and then put us closer to our true and essential nature. While ensuring that our actions emerge from this sense of centeredness, externally we set out to explore, experiment, learn and share our learnings in the areas of alternatives in energy, buildings, water, waste, farming, and food and health. Now each decade had its own unique struggles and challenges. It was by no means easy or straightforward. Bit by bit the infrastructure was built up. The campus has been off the grid. The key point here though is this was not an attempt to copy-paste an urban lifestyle onto an off-the-grid rural setup. Instead, this was an attempt to reduce our needs and then meet those reduced needs with predominantly local sources of renewable resources. We support our limited needs with rooftop solar PV systems. We have solar hot water heaters. We try to use biogas, firewood, and solar cookers predominantly for cooking. We have a shared community kitchen. And we have extensive rainwater harvesting, grey water systems, black water processing. We try to grow a lot of the food that we consume in the community, and our farming practices employ sustainable agricultural practices. And then finally, as part of our social outreach, we've established a local organic food cooperative, which is owned and operated by the local village community, but it is guided and supported by the values and the volunteer energy of Navadarshanam. The initiative provides sustained livelihood to the local village community and, among other things, helps directly connect farmers with urban consumers of organic produce. Now, there's nothing unique about all of this. There's lots of little communities all over the world that are exploring wonderful ideas. The key point is the transformation that occurs when we do this sort of a thing. And there's two things that are worth noting. One is the sense of liberation that starts to build up as we shed our dependence on what is otherwise supported by vast infrastructures, whether it is energy or sewage or water or food. We just unburden ourselves and the system of all of that. And the second is the idea of localization. Taking care of your own stuff where it is a manageable problem, and perhaps with appropriate technology, it ends up being the most efficient way of handling the needs. The structures are built using local material mostly. We use local sources of energy. We have local source for water, and your food is very close to the source. Now overall, we end up leading lives that keeps us in touch with the ecosystem that supports our lives, and to that extent we begin to value it, and to that extent we begin to act more responsibly as well as derive pleasure from the process. We're a small group doing small things. We've blundered along, made some mistakes, and made some course corrections along the way. But for us, it has always been about trying to create a space which reminds us of the interconnectedness of all things. A space where we can recapture our sense of intuition about what is good for us, what is good for the planet, and eventually get to the source of sustainable happiness. Now this is in contrast with modern lifestyles where things are so far removed from our true and essential nature that we are beginning to lose this connection with nature. When most things we touch are non-natural materials, when most things we smell are artificial smells, when most things we see are non-natural things, most sounds we hear are artificial sounds, And most of the food that we eat and the sense of taste that we have is derived from artificial flavors and synthetic foods and highly processed foods. Then we slowly start to develop this discord with nature, which over time we're likely to descend into something that can best be described as nature deficit disorder. In fact, sometimes it feels like it is a form of human derangement. Now, perhaps this is at the heart of why we approach things in the way we do, completely against nature. Now, let's look at a few examples. If you look at agriculture, now we all know that agrochemicals are one of the main contributors to environmental degradation and climate change. If you look at farming models, typically the way that farming occurs is we use vast amounts of toxic chemicals that get into the soil, get into the water, and then we plant seeds that somehow resist this toxicity, and then we harvest the grains and the crops that come out of this toxic soil, and we consume them. Now, the science can clearly establish the bad things going on in the cycle of cropping. But forgetting the science for a moment, what about our own sense of intuition? If we reflect on this, why on earth would we consume the food that comes out of such toxicity? But isn't it sad that somewhere we have bright minds in great universities, work and labs coming up with these sorts of solutions to perceive problems of yield and pests, and then bright minds market it, and bright minds in governments that are being tasked to regulate and protect us from these toxicities, in fact promoting these sorts of practices. And then we have bright farmers using these methods to grow the food, and then finally we have bright minds that are consuming this food and participating in this whole chain. Now, why on earth would every participant in this chain play their role? Rather than such large-scale monocropped industrial farming, we all know that on a smaller scale multi-crop farming using principles of permaculture and natural farming can tap into the wonderful arrangements of nature, the natural cycles that restore the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, mediated by symbiotic and asymbiotic relationships with microbes in the soil that have been going on for 1 billion years on the planet. Of course, the usual follow-up question is, can we scale this up and can we meet the needs of feeding the entire planet? And the answer is yes, we can meet the needs of the planet, but not by scaling up. It is by using these core ideas and applying it locally in wherever it makes sense. Now, let's take another example. Let's take the example of animal farming, which globally is perhaps the second biggest contributor to climate change and loss of biodiversity, increase in carbon dioxide, and reduction in oxygen. What we have happening in front of us is large acreage of forest being cleared at an extraordinary rate for livestock pastures, causing huge pollution and large-scale destruction of habitat for animals and plants, while at the same time now we have on the planet over 1 billion cattle, 1 billion sheep, 1 billion pigs, 1 billion goats, and 20 billion chicken. Now, while there's supposedly been a 60% drop in wildlife, during the same time, humans and their livestock have simply exploded on the planet. Now it's paramount that each and every one of us reflect on that. No matter what nation, what tribe, what religion we belong to, it is paramount that we move to a plant-based diet if we want to sustain life on this planet. The examples are endless. They're staring us in the face, and yet we seem to be insulating ourselves from these and wishing them away. Now, it is time to pause and internalize these issues so that we can recapture our intuition of what is right living. There's no question that from the perspective of our current lifestyles, we're heading into times of great hardship. Now, we've all developed the highly wasteful habits of consumerism, and it is almost an addiction that deep down we knew that we could not sustain. Our very idea of economic growth and prosperity is founded on the idea of rapidly expending non-renewable natural capital. Now, the bad news is we've reached the end of the line. Our survival as humans, as a species still connected to the natural world, is in great peril, and it calls upon us to urgently make strategic shifts, grave sacrifices, and exert extraordinary restraint in the way we utilize resources. If we are to continue to inhabit this planet indefinitely, then we need to use the remaining resources on the planet judiciously to transition to a sustainable lifestyle. It's like we're on this island and we've been wasting away all the resources on the island until we realize that the island is going underwater and it is going to take every last remaining resource, including the people, to work together to build a bridge to the mainland and save ourselves. Now, there are many staggering changes that we need to bring about at the planetary level. Redo our entire energy infrastructure, our entire transportation infrastructure, our food growing systems with renewables, and perhaps deconstruct the cities as they exist today, and so on. But two key notions to keep in mind as we work towards sustainable human habitation. One is the idea of regenerative ecosystems, an ecosystem that is in dynamic stability and our actions don't disturb the balance of resources. And second is the idea of localization, where by localizing we automatically bring more awareness, more accountability, traceability to the resources being consumed, and also to use appropriate technology for the solutions that we do come up with. Now, all that stuff, the dramatic shifts and sacrifices from the perspective of our current lives that we were talking about, is the bad news. Now, the good news is that these are ultimately just mental switches. Our lifestyles, tastes, and habits are ultimately fashioned by the values that we embrace. And so if we really internalize the issues, and clean air and clean water, non-toxic food, frugality, wilderness and forests, conservation and compassion towards all beings become the core values, then they trump the old ideas of wealth and prosperity, as well as any other emergent desires that we may have. And they automatically start to derive pleasure from the values, from the activities that fulfill these core values. Now, while we need to think at the planetary level, our ideas and actions and solutions need to be at the local level. So things that become important are localizing our resource base, our food, our energy, our water. Cooperative living becomes important. Community level initiatives become important. And local support structures become important. To make it easier, perhaps we can surround ourselves with like-minded family and friends and acquaintances that life has given us along the way as we embark on this tough phase of our lives. Now, everything that we have talked about until now is in the physical realm. And there is another realm that's vastly more important and transcends all of this. I started off by talking about the inner work that we all regard as very important here at Navadarshanam, our deep inner reflections that make the ultimate connection with our true and essential nature. Now, to me, this is the most important of all as we navigate the planetary crisis, developing the inner strength and resilience by discovering the living presence within us that is timeless, beyond change, and beyond death. It is eternal and remains untouched by this crisis. Let us make that connection, and let us be the instruments of actions that emanate from within and be at peace. Thank you.